The National Museum of Funeral History presents The Final Curtain Never Closes. I'm your host, Genevieve Keeney Vasquez, the president and CEO of the museum. This is a month that I know that we all remember, unfortunately, all too well. The month of September for me is bittersweet. It's my birth month, but at the same time, it's a month that I will never forget historically. September 11th is a date that I think is probably the most impactful day in so many people's lives. And I speak to that because we have an exhibit here at the National Museum of Funeral History where we honor those who lost their lives in the tragic events of September 11th. And we remember that day and all those who were heroes that day to try and help those in need. So today we're going to talk about a little bit on not only what September 11th means to me, but what September 11th means to us as a nation, to us as Americans, and just human beings in general. And I was going to do this podcast pretty much by myself and talk to you all and tell you stuff about it that I remember. And I began having a little bit of a conversation with my producer here, Freddie Cruz, and I thought to myself, September 11th impacted you as well. It impacted all of us. So I would like to welcome Freddie Cruz, my producer, to join me on this podcast today because he too can reflect on that day.
It's 22 years now since it's happened.
Doesn't it seem like yesterday?
It seems like yesterday.
All the time.
Especially when you're a parent, and I know you're a parent also.
Yes.
And so you subtract those years.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
I mean, some of us have kids that weren't even born yet, but then some were toddlers, and I'm sure they're now learning it in their history books or have learned it. And yeah, they would be 22 years old now.
Yeah, and you think about the little kids who lost their parents or their grandparents or aunts, uncles, and they didn't get a chance to say goodbye, or in some cases they're infants, and so there's no memory at all of these people.
Yeah, there's no memory of the person itself, but there'll always be a memory of the incident.
Right.
Yeah, because it'll be talked about for years to come. It is a part of our history. It's written in stone, basically. Mr. Bedecker, our chairman now, he had come up to me one day and he said, in the warehouse we have all these black bags, trash bags, if you will. They're, I don't want to belittle that by saying that it's a trash bag, but it was used to protect, right? Mm-hmm. So when I say a black bag, I'm referring to a trash bag, a plastic bag, so everyone can understand and visualize what I'm speaking to. And he said, we have hundreds of these boxes that are wrapped up in trash bags in the back. And they just have been there for years. And I was very curious as to what they were. And I had never opened them. And by that time I had been working here for 11 years. And I had some volunteers and we had this large classroom, and I said, open up all these boxes. I want to know what's in them. And in hundreds of boxes, there were memorial books that were signed on September 12th across the entire nation. Because when September 11th happened, it became a nation in grief. And it affected all of us worldwide. And so Mr. Waltrip, seeing the magnitude, the ripple effect that this had, and he had requested that every single one of his funeral homes around the nation, and to include Canada, to put a memorial book out for people to come and express their condolences to all of the lives that were lost that day. And we're talking about complete strangers, people didn't know, but their death affected us all. And we, unbeknownst to me, we were holding history in our hands in a way that I don't even think people realized that existed. And I said, wow, this is something that needs to be given honor and respect. And I ended up curating an exhibit for the 15th anniversary of 9/11. And I had so many memorial books that I was able to build 2 twin towers out of them.
How long did it take for you to get through all of the material and to decipher people's handwriting? Because that's another factor that you don't really take into consideration,
Yeah.
because you can go from ideation, which is a genius idea to do it, but then it's like, oh, wait a minute, now I got to, Susie and Bob don't have good handwriting. And I said Bob, not realizing Bob Bedecker, and
That's
Bob,
okay.
I'm not talking to you. But yeah, Susie and John.
Yeah.
Right.
But yeah,
Yeah.
so it wasn't so much about having to read the handwriting. It was interesting. Some of the books I would open up, and literally there were handprint cutouts where you could see like an elementary school had drawn photos of and making condolence cards. A whole classroom. I had a whole classroom of young kids in elementary school. Somehow they took all of those cards and took them to the funeral home. They ended up in these memorial books. And as I was opening these books, the story was starting to be told to me in a very different way. And I am, unfortunately, when I'm curating an exhibit, I really have to dive in and do a lot of research. And 15 years later, there was a lot of, information at my fingertips. I could get more fine-tuned into the facts and the timelines and really understand how that day unfolded and the events that took place right after. And I won't lie, there were some nights in my office where I was like, oh, this is too heavy. I've got to back off a little bit. I need a little bit of a break.
That's saying a lot too, because you do more than operate the museum.
Yeah, I curate the exhibits. I do the research behind them, so I make sure that the facts are being told when people come in and see them.
And all the other stuff too. You're a palliative nurse and you're a funeral director. So, I mean, this is,
Death is my life, basically. You
right.
know?
And even then.
But even then, it can get too much for me. And knowing my limits and where my boundary is, so that I can back it off a little bit. And so as I was going and learning all this information at the same time, I'm trying to envision how do I put this exhibit together and do it justice and honor and respect and tell the story as hard as this story is to tell. And I'm very proud of that exhibit. It was a temporary exhibit, but it will come back in the 25th anniversary. So in 3 years, that exhibit will come back out again. I will rebuild that exhibit. But I have to say, probably one of the most memorable parts that I came across which ended up leading me to another element of information that I needed to put into the exhibit, was in, I believe it was October or November, I had a memorial book. And I came across it, and there was a memorial folder inside the book, and it was a father and a son. And I looked at it, and I said, oh my goodness, I said, I think we have a family's memorial book that accidentally got put in to this group of 9/11 memorial books.
So a non-9/11 family's
That's what I thought when I opened it, because it had the memorial folder of a father and a son. And now, mind you, I'm going through hundreds of books.
Yeah.
And so this one stood out from the rest.
So they don't all look the same after you're in the flow of going through all these things.
Well, they do, because you can kind of see how you can understand how the memorial book that's set out, and you can see the dates, right? September 11, or September 12,
okay,
September 13, September 4. You can see that these are all books that were signed in September, right? Because there was I also came across the memorandum that said, please have all your memorial books mailed to 1929 Allen Parkway. I believe it was the end of October was when all these books were to be mailed. And that was the collection point for all these books. And so when I came across this one in October, when most of the books were kind of completed in September, I had this one in October, and it had, like I said, this memorial folder of this father and son in it. And immediately I thought, oh my gosh, a family's book is in this massive box of 9/11 memorial tributes. And so I said, I've got to return this book. This book has to get returned to the family. And so I started doing my research on the family who, typed their names in, and come to find out that they were a father and son sitting next to each other on one of the planes. And I was so moved by that. And it was during my research is where I learned exactly where they were sitting on the planes. So I actually was able to print out the manifest to see where they were actually sitting. And it became part of the exhibit, showing, putting it to me, it was so impactful that I thought this has to be shown that, I don't know. I think at that moment, I kind of got to know two of the people there.
Yeah.
And the story was being told. And it was, what happened is that the family had a memorial to them finally in October. So it was the actual memorial that the family held for them as victims that lost their lives on that day. And they became part of the exhibit as two people that had faces.
You talk about feeling as though you got to know two people personally who died. And as you recount that story, I'm thinking of how I see myself as a parent in the absolute worst case scenario.
Yeah.
With your kid.
Yeah.
And
to perish with them.
I think about death. It's not my living, but I think about death quite often, and I've accepted it. And I think you and I have spoken about death before on a previous podcast interview. And so I've heard you talk about it before. It's not death that we're scared of. It's the dying part.
It's how we die. Yeah. Are we going to suffer? Is it going to be quick? Are we going to know it's coming? It's all of that. And there have been many of times that I countless times, and I've done this since a child, is try to put myself into the place of that person that is meeting their demise in that moment.
Yeah.
It's like, did they know what went through their mind? Was it fast enough that they had no ability to process the thought behind it?
It's going to happen to your kids one way or another. You hope to God that it doesn't happen and they depart the earth before you, yet here we are, a son and his dad at the exact same moment. And so I wonder if that doesn't bring somebody some sort of level of comfort. Well, at least we won't suffer and we know we're meeting our demise and it's going to be quick.
Yeah, it kind of, just like you're curious as to what goes through their mind in that moment, but at the same time, there's, for me, it's, let me do a sidestep, if you will.
Sure.
Since it's kind of along these lines. When I was in the military, they were giving out the vaccine for anthrax. And of course they were only giving the anthrax out to the service members because anthrax was a threat to our nation and to our fighting forces. And so I just remember I went to my coworkers and I said, "Well, aren't you going to vaccinate the families members?" And they were like, "No, only the service members." And I said, "Well, then I don't want it." I said, because if they're going to attack us with anthrax, the worst thing I want to do is out-survive my family. Just the thought that my family would die from this, chemical warfare and I would survive, I don't want that. I don't want to out-survive my children.
Yeah.
From that type of tragedy, And so thinking along the lines that if we had to part from our children, I would like to part with my children.
Yeah. I guess that's where I was going because you already know that we're all going to die. And it's like, okay, if you were able to have that conversation with your maker,
Yeah, exactly.
And say, hey.
But then, you know,
know?
you gotta remember that this father and son died tragically together.
Right.
But you know that there's a mother that was left behind.
And that's where it starts to get.
That's where it starts to get very painful.
Yes.
You know, when you start, you know, there's there's a little sense of like, oh, they went together, a comfort in knowing they went together. But then there's that pain right behind it that says, but what about the mother?
Yes. And
Because now the mother has to live with the fact that she's lost both of them.
And what if this was a trip where they ended up on a plane and she at the last minute couldn't go, and then she's got that survivor's guilt?
Oh, yes.
You
And
know?
survivor's guilt is very real. Survivor's guilt is very real.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a lot of times that people don't understand what it is and what it's supposed to feel like. But survivor's guilt doesn't go away. I think it stays with you for your lifetime.
You're haunted by it.
Yeah, it's a
because
haunting, yes.
You wake up every day and they're not there. And I mean, I don't know. I clearly don't know the story of this family.
Yeah, I don't know the story of the family beyond the fact of where they sat on the plane and that there was a memorial service held for them in October.
Yeah.
That's as far as I know. But, you know, we all, I think, you know, we were talking earlier about how we get desensitized to death in whole, right?
Yeah.
Through constant news feeds of death. And, you know, just recently, for some reason, there's been this feed coming up on my emails every morning. And the top story is somebody murdered somebody killed somebody. It's death every day. And I'm hypersensitive to that stuff. You know, if you watch the news, I can tell you the first 5 to 7 minutes of that is all about death that has occurred in our city or in our nation somewhere. But death happens every day. So undoubtedly, we're consistently exposed to it. But to what level are we exposed to it? And when I say what level is, are we just hearing it and allowing it to pass us by because we hear it all the time? We know it's there, but we don't want to address it. But then when it happens to us, it's so impactful. It's like a freight train out of nowhere. Mm-hmm. But if you would really sit down in a quiet moment and think about it, it can be very profound and very deeply seated because you're facing your own mortality.
Yeah. And you had Haley Campbell on an earlier episode. I had the chance to talk to her late last year, and there was a statistic from her book, All the Living and the Dead, where she breaks down how many deaths happen around the world within the course of 24 hours and within 1 hour of just us being here. And you think about somebody taking their final breath, 1 or 2 people or however many it is, I forget the stat, but from minute 1 to minute 45 or however long this episode goes, there will be people that die.
Yeah. Right now, as we talk, you know, there's somebody dying.
Last hour.
Yeah. Last hour.
There are funerals all over the world happening.
All the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but on the contrary, just as there's death happening every minute, there's also birth happening. It's the cycle of life. If you think of it, you know, there's hundreds of babies being born every hour, you know, all around the world. And at the same time, there's just as many deaths happening.
Something that makes me think during 9/11 is how certain people can seem to be desensitized to it, how some people can be oversensitive to it, and then how some people are, you know, they're one way or the other, but it's for like 5 minutes and then everything is back to normal.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Huh? Yeah. So, and I think that is an innate feature within the human being itself. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because you have to think about it. We cannot grief and the impact a stressful situation has upon the body. If you can think about it at a cellular level. Mm-hmm. Okay. It causes chemicals and hormones to be triggered and released in the body.
Like cortisol, the stress hormone, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and your adrenaline, like your fight or flight response and stuff like that, There's different chemicals that get released in the body that are there for our survival, really, truly. And they're there to help us cope with tragic situations or life-threatening situations. But our bodies are not programmed to be able to sustain that level of chemical compound within our bloodstream, right?
Yeah.
And our heart and organs having to deal with that. So it's actually unhealthy for us to maintain that level. So we think about it, and then in 5 minutes later, we're on to something else. It's almost a coping mechanism and a survival skill at the same time, if you think about it. Because if we didn't, then we would all probably be at the bottom of a bottle somewhere. None of us would probably get out of bed, and the world would cease to exist. Interesting, we're sitting here and we're talking about how impactful grief is. And we actually have an item in the museum that speaks to that. It's a triple casket.
Oh, yes.
And this triple casket, we go back and we're talking about being the loss of a child, right? And the power of the grief that's experienced when a child departs this earth before you. So our triple casket was built by a husband and wife who lost their child to death. And their grief was so heavy that they felt they couldn't continue on. They didn't care. They didn't want to live. So kind of back to what I was saying earlier, I don't want to outlive my children.
Most of us don't.
Most of us don't. We don't want to outlive our children. And here this family was faced with that fact of outliving their child. And the grief was so heavy, they wanted to join her in death. And so they had a murder-suicide pact. They went to their local funeral director, asked them to have this special casket made, and so that all three of them can be buried together. They were going to have the child exhumed. After the casket was created, the murder-suicide was to happen. The child was to be exhumed. They were all to be buried together and be in eternal rest forever together. And the manufacturing process of the materials getting shipped in, because it was a custom piece, it took time. And back then, grief wasn't so talked about as it is today. And they didn't realize that with time, grief does begin to lift. It lessens. It gets you to a point where you're like, okay, all right. The cloud is starting to pass. The sun is starting to shine. I can start to live life again. And that's exactly what happened to them. The grief began to lessen, the sun began to shine, and they realized that they did not want to join their child in death. And so thankfully, the murder-suicide never happened. Child is still resting in its initial resting place. And the casket sat forever in this factory until the factory closed. And then it was gifted to the museum with the tragic story that thankfully never happened.
Beautifully painful, painfully beautiful.
Yes.
And here we're talking about the father and son that died tragically on 9/11 and bringing it back to mourning not just loved ones, but mourning as a nation.
Yeah, and the effect that death truly does have on us all. On 9/11, it was more of a attack on us all, right? I mean, yes, it was a large amount of the lives lost. It was heroes lost. It was an unnecessary evil that attacked us all and our livelihood. And I think that is what resonates and made that ripple effect. And still today we feel that grief.
And speaking of mourning as a nation and as Houstonians, because we are in the Houston area in the National Museum of Funeral History, and while the 15th anniversary special exhibit is gone and you're bringing back another one for the 25th anniversary, you do have an exhibit featuring some urns.
Yes, we have urns that house the ashes of Ground Zero. We were entrusted and given the custodian of these urns from the Port Authority of New York. And the ashes of Ground Zero, although they're not how would I say it? They're not like one person in that urn. It's ground debris. It's the stuff. It's the ashes from that space. So there's so much there. It's the entire calamity of it all, if you will.
So it could be remnants of a car, remnants of a building, remnants of a beam, human remains, animal remains, or whatever was from that area. And I feel weird asking.
No, it would be more or less just it's the, I wouldn't, no metal, because, metal doesn't really reduce itself to ash. It's more of all of the stuff that can burn and become ash, the everything, the office supplies, the people, the whatever was in that building. It's everything.
Yeah.
But we know, in our heart of hearts, we know that it's the people that matter the most that's in that urn.
Yeah.
Yeah. The things that are irreplaceable.
And a recurring theme of, I guess, just when it comes to people who work in the death care industry, and I've spent enough time with you to kind of understand where all of you are coming from when it's okay to mourn, it's okay to be sad. You have to do this. This is all part of the process. My wife works within the death care industry as well, so I very much know all of that from her perspective as well. And so it's one of those things where if maybe you're having trouble explaining something to a younger person, then this would be a great time to come out to the museum and explain, like, this is why this kind of stuff is important and why it's embedded into the cultural fabric of our nation, and why we make sure that we don't forget what's happening. And yes, you're right. We don't know every single individual. We never will.
Exactly.
But at the same time, it's important to show respect for what happened to these people.
And I think it's important also to show how we should never be forgotten. Why it's important to have the opportunity to mourn the loss of a human being, to reflect on the life that was lived by that human being, to understand the lives that person left behind and the impact that it had upon them. But importantly, they always say, "Oh, know your history so we don't repeat it again." Mm-hmm. To me, it's know your history so you never forget those that were important to us.
It's also thinking about how young somebody may have been when they passed away that day, and living up to your potential, knowing that, this person was 26 in 2001, and so was I. And they did not get to live to where I'm soon to be 48 at the time of this recording. And so thinking about that and reflecting on it, and this is something that I sort of taught myself when we go and visit my in-laws at the cemetery. Unfortunately, both my mother and my mother-in-law and my father-in-law are deceased. And when we go visit them, and a few spots down, there's somebody, Jonathan Kyle Lunsford, who was born in the summer of the same year I was born. And I forget the birthday.
But you remember his name, and that's important.
One day he was here, and then he was gone.
Yeah.
And it's an exercise in living up to your fullest potential, that there are people who, this guy didn't get to experience anything that I ever have gotten to experience. And so bringing it back to 2001, the people who are my age.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like-
were able to reach that age, you know.
Yeah.
I reflect on that too, on the death of my sisters. One of my sisters passed away at 39, and I kid you not, when I turned 40, that was the hardest birthday, and I can still remember the impact that it had on me because I thought how unfair she never got to be 40.
Yeah.
We talk about birthdays as, oh, it's another year, but really a birthday is, wow, I got to have another year.
What a gift.
What a gift. Yeah, because so many people don't get that, you know. Yeah. And there are so many people that don't get that choice to get that, you know. I mean, yeah, we all have choices in life, and there are unfortunately, some people who take their lives, and I do want to speak to that. There are people that commit suicide because they feel that life, they can't go on anymore. And we talked about that with the triple casket. That was a choice that they were going to make. And, we're talking about grief and the impact that grief has on us. And we have, this constant, almost like this bipolar conversation where we're talking about life, and in the next moment we're talking about death. And so it's an up and it's a down. And I do want to say that, sometimes suicide is because the grief is just too heavy. People just can't see out of it.
Yeah.
And again, if you do know somebody that, is suicidal and has experienced some tragedy in their life, do reach out to them.
And a lot of times, and all the time, actually, and that's the best thing that somebody can do is just reach out and make the effort. And I mean, I would like to think that even if they don't take your call or answer your text back, they see that you called, they see that they mattered enough for somebody to reach out to them. And maybe they didn't have the energy or the bandwidth to take your call or answer your text. They leave you on red. That if you keep at it.
Yeah, keep at it.
They'll answer.
Yeah, and I've seen, death to me, I've seen all the faces of death. I've seen, with 9/11, it's the tragic face of death, right? People, didn't have a choice. Someone chose to take their lives. And then I've seen where disease took somebody's life. My husband and I were talking about that in our last month's podcast of how we have a very healthy friend whose life was snatched away by cancer. In 9/11, everyone's life was snatched away by the terrorists. And then, there are people who take their own lives and snatch their own life away, but it's because of the dark demons that lie within. And we don't know the names of those demons. It could be a demon named grief, but unless we walk in their shoes, we do not understand. So I think it's important that we understand that death comes in so many forms and fashions. But I think the most popular one that we're exposed to are the tragic ones, people who die at the hands of another person. And that seems to be what is most talked about. It's what's it's in our entertainment venues, it's in the news, but there's more faces to death than what we're mostly exposed to.
Yeah, and bringing it back to the conversation with Haley is that you only see that kind. You don't see everyday, normal, boring death.
Yeah, exactly. Like the death of, that people just die naturally. I'm working on Queen Elizabeth exhibit, and I actually have a copy of her death certificate from the Scotland Yard. And when I looked at the cause of death, I just had this wow, finally. I haven't seen that face of death in forever, and her face of death was old age.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what we all can hope for, right? That we die of old age in our sleep, surrounded by our family, right? Or old age in our sleep peacefully,
right.
And to see that on her death certificate was, it was just so peaceful. It was so odd. Because there so many causes of deaths are disease or a cardiac arrest secondary to respiratory failure or it's just all this other stuff. But I don't think I've ever got to see a death certificate that said old age.
Old age, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Maybe the last one would be Betty White.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I mean, just last month in pop culture, and he's from Houston, Patrick Swayze, and look at how he died.
Yeah.
Tragically,
Tragic,
pancreatic
yeah.
cancer. I mean, you talk about the worst of the worst. I mean, cancer is a demon in and of itself.
Oh, it is.
Having
yeah.
the deadliest form of cancer.
I mean, we all will die. You know, it's certain, right? And it's just, we don't know how we're going to die. We don't know our method of death. We don't know what will take us to that final moment.
It's the unknown.
It's the unknown, and that's what's scary.
Yeah.
You know, and like I say, I'm not afraid to die. I'm afraid of how I'm going to die. And there are so many different exposures of death that like I said, I have been or seen that I try to envision, what that person went through, and I would be like, oh gosh, I don't want that one. It's almost like I'm filtering out the modes of death, right? And I'd be like, I don't want that one. I don't want that one. Okay, I can handle that one. No, I don't want that one.
You can go shopping at the Grim Reaper's death store. What would you pick out?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, definitely not drowning.
Oh,
definitely
gosh,
not drowning.
no,
For me, I can't. I can't even hold my breath very long when I'm taking a shower because I have to breathe. I can't hold my breath very long underwater. So definitely not drowning for me. And it just, it's just one of those things. I guess when death is your profession and death is your life and you have been exposed to death in the manners that I have, right? I'm not morbid. I'm just exposed.
Yeah.
And because I have that level of exposure, like most people don't, it puts me into a different thought process on things, I mean, it's just, I look at death very different.
I don't wish to put my thumb on the scale of how people live their lives.
True.
I would say that life would be a lot easier if more people kind of had that outlook, because I think people would find it not so bad.
Yeah, and if people would, I always like to use embrace, right?
Yeah.
When you think of embracing, you think of that as a comforting term, arms wrapped around you, someone comforting you. So it's like, how do you embrace death when death is not a comforting topic or subject matter? But if you can embrace it in a way that you understand that we will all experience it, I like to think that people could have a more open concept to the effect that it has on everybody, and it affects everybody differently.
Yeah.
And if we can respect that, like different religions, if we could respect that as well, I think we could have a more harmonial way of living our life.
Exactly. And that's part of the mission right here at the National Museum of Funeral History in North Houston. So we hope to see you here, whether it's the 9/11 exhibit, whether it's the Shroud of Turin, the most famous burial of all time,
or it's learning about the history of our presidents and the funerals that we had for them, because when a president dies, it affects the nation as well.
Yep.
Or if you just want to walk down memory lane and thanks for the memories and reflect again on the lives that people had that entertained us, and they too are gone. I remember I was doing the Thanks for the Memory exhibit, and we were focusing on the Wizard of Oz segment. And I remember I was watching a video on Dorothy, and I was holding the memorial folder of the lady who played Dorothy. And I sat back in my chair, and in that moment I said, oh my gosh, Dorothy is dead. And I said, I never thought that Dorothy could die, because Dorothy is never dead to me, because she's forever alive in the movie The Wizard of Oz.
and she looks the same
And she looks the same
every time.
every time. It was an epiphany. It literally had a freight train effect on me. I was like, I can't believe it. She's dead. Dorothy's dead. I'm like, but movies keep them alive.
That's probably also why we have such a hard time with historical figures, whether they're political leaders or movie stars, musicians, because they remind us of a certain time in our lives that were the good old days, whether or not they were actually good, but they were the good old days back when we were young, or back in our 20s, or back in our 30s, or if you're 80, back in our 60s. When
I mean, because you can always remember back. I mean, thankfully, we're talking. We started out our segment talking about a time in life where it was very tragic, but now we're talking about remembering some happy times, like you said, where we're watching. I remember watching The Wizard of Oz, and every time I watch The Wizard of Oz, I'm taken back to that moment.
Yeah.
And interesting enough, talking about that, my granddaughter, who is 4, and she is hooked on Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the original one right now. I think she's an old soul trapped in a young body. And she's watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, oh gosh, I think like maybe a dozen times already in the last month. And because my daughter tells me about it all the time. So yesterday she was here, and she walked into Thanks for the Memories, and she said, "Oh, Willy hat." Out of everything in the museum, she recognized Willy Wonka's hat that we have. And think about it, when she's 20 years old and she sees Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory at 20, he's still going to be alive to her.
Yeah.
And she's going to remember that moment of perhaps coming to the National Museum of Funeral History and seeing Willy Wonka's hat. So we sit here and we talk about these memories and how powerful they are to us. And some of them are positive memories, and unfortunately some of them are negative memories. But it's all in how we allow them to be in our life and part of our life, and how we walk through life with these memories.
And that's a wonderful way to wind it down. But before we do, there are some things happening this fall.
Yes, the museum is always abuzz at the fall time. October is our most popular month. And so we've got some awesome events lined up in October. On October the 13th, Friday the 13th, we're putting together the Witch's Brew Market. Kind of think of the Nutcracker Market, but for the Halloween time frame.
I love it.
And so that's going to be October 13th, and you can get tickets online on our website at www.nmfh.org. You get a lot for your money, but the general admission ticket is $40, and you can upgrade to a VIP for $35 more, making it a $75 ticket, but you get an hour early entrance. You will also get an extra drink ticket, and you will be getting a commemorative handmade wine cup that states the Witch's Brew from Nay's Cups and Creations. And you'll be getting a pair of witchy earrings from Crazy Creations as part of your VIP package. And so we hope to see you all here. We've got a lot of amazing vendors lined up, to include some of those oddity vendors that you would expect to see at the National Museum of Funeral History. And then, of course, if you love cars, you definitely have to come out to our annual Halloween car show on October 28th. Our parking lot will be full of fascinating cars dressed up for Halloween, and we'll have a trunk or treat for children. There is an admission also for the car show. You can go online and get all that information. We will also be putting on our family-friendly haunted house for the month of October. And again, all of that information will be online. And we hope to see you all here in the month of October. We're really excited, and my staff is working really hard to put all these fun family events together for our community here in Houston at the National Museum of Funeral History.
Genevieve, thank you so much for letting me join you this episode.
Yeah, it was a hard episode, but I couldn't do this one solo. I think it needed to be a conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me today on this podcast, and I hope that you will share this episode and our future episodes with family and friends. We look forward to any feedback you have to offer by giving us a review on Apple or Spotify, and we hope that you will join us for a virtual tour at www.nmfh.org. And always remember, any day above ground is a good one.